Imagine this. You wake up one morning and for the first time in your life, you see it. The invisible strings. They're attached to your wrists, your neck, your thoughts. Every decision you make, every fear that grips you, every time you hesitate, you realize it's not you pulling the strings. It's something else. Someone else. A force so deeply embedded in the fabric of reality that you've mistaken it for your own voice. And then the most terrifying question of all creeps in. What if everything you're afraid of was planted inside you? Not by accident, not by some random twist of fate, but deliberately, systematically over years of conditioning, by society, by institutions, by the very people who claim to protect you. Think of the last time you hesitated to speak your mind, the moment you swallowed your truth because people might judge you, the career you didn't pursue because it's too risky, the love you didn't chase because what if it fails? Where did those fears come from? Were they born in you or were they given to you? Here's the unsettling truth. Fear is not natural. It is manufactured. From the moment you were born, you were handed a script, a list of acceptable fears. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of being poor, alone, unworthy, fear of stepping out of line. These weren't accidents. They were carefully crafted, reinforced by every authority figure, every advertisement, every news cycle, every social expectation. Why? Because a fearful population is an obedient one. Think about it. If you were truly unafraid, if you didn't fear poverty, loneliness, or social exclusion, how easily could you be controlled? How willingly would you follow the rules, buy the products, stay in the cage? This is the great paradox of modern society. We are taught to fear the very things that could set us free. Failure. The only real failure is never trying. Rejection. The right people won't reject you. Poverty. Most of the world's greatest minds died poor. Loneliness. It's better than being surrounded by people who make you feel alone. So why do we still tremble at these ghosts? Because society doesn't just use fear, it programs it. It embeds it in your nervous system before you even learn to question it. By the time you're old enough to ask, why am I afraid? The fear has already taken root. It feels like yours. But here's the most disturbing question of all. What if the things you've been taught to fear are the exact things you should embrace? What if rejection is just redirection? What if failure is the only real education? What if loneliness is the price of authenticity? And most importantly, what if the only way to break free is to unlearn fear itself? This is not just about courage. This is about awakening. Because the moment you realize your fears were never truly yours, the entire illusion begins to crack. And that's where the real journey begins. You've felt it before. That gnawing sense that something isn't right. A quiet voice whispering that the world isn't what they told you it was. But every time you get close to listening, the noise of daily life drowns it out. Work, bills, social expectations, the endless scroll. It's not an accident. The machinery of fear is ancient, sophisticated, and disturbingly effective. To understand how deeply it's embedded in you, we must trace its roots, not just in society, but in the human mind itself. The birth of manufactured fear. Long before algorithms and advertising, fear was a tool of control. Kings ruled by divine terror. Religions wielded hellfire as a deterrent. Entire civilizations were built on the premise that people must be afraid of gods, of rulers, of exile. But in the modern era, fear became something far more insidious, invisible. No longer do we tremble before tyrants or priests. Instead, we fear intangibles. Failure, irrelevance, financial ruin, social exclusion. These are not primal survival instincts. They are learned terrors implanted through education systems that punish mistakes instead of rewarding experimentation. Media cycles that amplify threats to keep us anxious and compliant. Consumer culture that ties self-worth to possessions and status. Social hierarchies that reward conformity and punish dissent. The result? A population that polices itself. The psychological wiring of fear. Carl Jung once wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." But what if the avoidance isn't just personal? What if it's by design? Your brain is wired to seek safety, and society exploits this wiring mercilessly, the illusion of scarcity. You're taught that success, love, and security are limited resources, so you compete instead of create. The Stockholm Syndrome of comfort. Even when miserable, you cling to familiar suffering because the unknown seems worse. The bystander effect of the mind. The more others conform, the more you assume they must know something you don't. Friedrich Nietzsche saw this clearly. Madness is rare in individuals, but in groups, it is the rule. The philosophical prison Jean-Paul Sartre argued that hell is other people. But what he really meant was, hell is the version of yourself you create to please them. From childhood, you're handed an identity: student, employee, consumer, citizen, each with its own rulebook of fears. Fear of failing school, that's the fear of becoming unemployable. Fear of missing out, that's the fear of being left behind. Fear of speaking up, that's the fear of being cast out. These are not your fears. They are the fears of the system, absorbed into your psyche until they feel like instinct. Arthur Schopenhauer put it best: most men are not born to think. They are born to obey. But here's the twist: you cannot obey your way to freedom. The turning point. The moment you realize society's fears are not yours is the moment you begin waking up. But awakening is painful. It means seeing through. The job that keeps you too tired to question. The relationships that keep you too distracted to grow. The politics that keep you too angry to think. Aldous Huxley warned, the most effective tyranny is not the one that uses force, but the one that convinces people to imprison themselves. And you have imprisoned yourself, not with bars, but with fears you didn't choose. So now the critical question: if fear is the lock, what's the key? The most dangerous prison is the one you don't realize you're in. You walk through life believing you're free, making choices, chasing dreams, avoiding risks, never noticing the walls around you. But they're there, invisible, silent, built brick by brick from the fears you've absorbed without question. And the tragedy? You built them yourself, not consciously, not willingly, but through thousands of tiny surrenders. Every time you swallowed your truth to keep the peace. Every time you chose safety over authenticity. Every time you let society's whispers drown out your own voice. Now, the consequences are everywhere. You were born wild, unfiltered, unafraid to want what you wanted, to scream when you were angry, to laugh when you were happy. Then, slowly, you learned to hide. You stopped asking bold questions because it's impolite. You forced yourself to enjoy things you hated because that's what people do. You abandoned your quirks because they're too much. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the parts of yourself you bury to be accepted. But here's the terrible truth: the more you hide, the emptier you become. You trade your soul for approval and wonder why you feel dead inside. Modern fear doesn't come with fangs and claws. It's subtler, more corrosive. It's the low hum of dread in your chest when you think about quitting the job that drains you. What if I fail? Leaving the relationship that suffocates you? What if I'm alone forever? Pursuing the dream that excites you? What if people laugh? This isn't natural caution. This is programmed paralysis, a mind trained to see danger in liberation. Viktor Frankl, survivor of the Holocaust, wrote, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose." But society has shrunk that space to nothing. You think you're free because you can choose between brands, careers, lifestyles. But what if every choice is just a different flavor of the same prison? Work 80 hours a week to afford things you don't need. Numb yourself with entertainment to forget you're unfulfilled. Chase status to prove you're worthy to people you don't even like. Aldous Huxley saw it coming. People will come to love their oppression, to adore the technologies that undo their capacities to think. You don't rebel because you've been made too comfortable in your chains. The worst consequence isn't what fear does to your circumstances, it's what it does to you. Every time you betray yourself to fit in, a part of you withers. The artist who becomes an accountant, the rebel who learns to stay quiet, the dreamer who grows up and settles. Fyodor Dostoevsky warned, "The mystery of human existence lies not in just staying alive, but in finding something to live for." But how can you find it when you've been trained to fear the search? Fear doesn't just isolate you from yourself. It isolates you from others. You wear masks so often you've forgotten your own face, and so has everyone else. Relationships become transactions. What can you do for me? Love becomes a risk assessment. Will they hurt me? Vulnerability becomes a weakness. Never let them see you struggle. This is why the modern world is so lonely. You're surrounded by people but starved for connection. Because real connection requires real people, and most of us are just ghosts of who we could have been. These consequences aren't accidents. They're the inevitable result of a system that profits from your fear. Fear keeps you consuming. Fear keeps you working. Fear keeps you small. But now you see it. And that changes everything. The moment you realize you've been programmed is the moment the programming starts to fail. A crack forms in the illusion. A sliver of light enters the prison. Suddenly, you see the bars, and for the first time, you realize they were never locked. The chains were only ever held in place by your own hands. Now comes the rebellion. Every fear you carry was given to you by someone. Parents who warned you to be realistic. Teachers who punished curiosity. Media that sold you nightmares disguised as news. Your first act of defiance? Question everything. When fear whispers, "You can't do that," ask, "Says who? What's the worst that could happen? Who benefits from me believing this?" Friedrich Nietzsche said it best. All things are subject to interpretation. Whichever interpretation prevails at a given time is a function of power, not truth. The moment you start interrogating your fears is the moment they lose power. But fear doesn't just live in your mind, it's wired into your body. The racing heart, the clenched jaw, the frozen limbs. Society has conditioned these reactions into you since childhood. Now, you must condition them out. The antidote? Voluntary discomfort, cold showers when you crave warmth, speaking up when you want to stay silent, sitting alone with your thoughts instead of numbing them. Each act of chosen discomfort is a strike against the regime of fear. As Carl Jung observed, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." Your fear is also fed by the world around you. News cycles designed to keep you anxious, social media algorithms that thrive on your insecurity, advertising that manufactures desires you never had. The most valuable currency isn't money, it's your attention. Take it back. Delete the apps that fragment your focus. Cancel the subscriptions that sell you fear. Create blank spaces in your day where thought can grow. Marshall McLuhan warned, "We shape our tools, and thereafter, our tools shape us." Reclaim the tool of your attention, and you reclaim your mind. And then, the ultimate act of defiance: radical self-ownership. Society wants you to believe your value comes from external validation. Your identity must fit neatly into a checkbox. Your life must follow predetermined stages. The revolution is in defining yourself completely. Success is what you say it is. Relationships must meet your standards. Your time is spent on your terms. This is what Jean-Paul Sartre meant by existence precedes essence. You are not what society says you are what you do. To sustain this freedom, you must build your inner citadel, an unshakable fortress no external chaos can breach. Its foundation, non-negotiable values written down and reviewed daily. Boundaries that protect your time, energy, and self-respect. Practices that ground you, journaling, meditation, creation. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire but knew you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. And when fear tries one last time to lure you back into stagnation, you defy it by creating anyway. Write the book no one will read. Start the business doomed to fail. Love like you've never been hurt. Every act of creation is a middle finger to fear. As Dostoevsky wrote in his prison diary, "To live without hope is to cease to live." This rebellion isn't about anger, it's about awakening. You're not fighting society. You're fighting the version of yourself that believed society's lies. With every fear you unlearn, a chain falls away, your vision clears, your true self emerges, and then you're free. Here is the secret at the end of the labyrinth. Fear was never your enemy. It was your compass. Every terror society programmed into you, every sleepless night, every stifled dream, every moment you felt not enough was actually a map. A glowing trail of breadcrumbs leading you back to yourself. Because the things they conditioned you to fear were precisely the things that could set you free. The great inversion. Consider this paradox. They taught you to fear failure, but failure is the only real teacher. They made you dread rejection. But rejection is nature's way of redirecting you. They terrified you with solitude, yet all great truths are found alone. Nietzsche glimpsed this when he wrote, "You must have chaos within you to give birth to a dancing star." Your deepest fears were never walls, they were doors. The alchemy of fear. Ancient alchemists sought to turn lead into gold. Your alchemy is different, turning fear into fuel. That anxiety about quitting your job, it's pointing toward your true calling. That terror of being alone, it's highlighting your need for self-intimacy. That dread of speaking your mind, it's marking the exact spot where your power lies. Carl Jung discovered, what you resist not only persists, but will grow in size. Stop resisting, start listening. The final illusion shatters. The ultimate revelation. Society didn't program your fears to control you. It programmed them because it's afraid of you, afraid of what you might become if you stopped asking permission, ignored the rulebook, trusted your own rhythm. All great revolutionaries, from Socrates to Galileo to Orwell's Winston Smith, shared one trait. They became terrifying to the system the moment they stopped being terrified by it. Your new relationship with fear, from this day forward. When fear arises, ask, is this fear mine or was it given to me? What would I do if this fear didn't exist? How can I use this fear as a guide? This is what Viktor Frankl meant when he said, between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. That space is where your freedom lives. The unprogrammed life. Imagine waking up without that familiar tightness in your chest, making decisions from desire rather than dread, seeing societal norms as curious artifacts rather than commandments. This isn't fantasy, it's your birthright. The poet Rilke described it perfectly. Perhaps all the dragons in our lives are princesses who are only waiting to see us act, just once with beauty and courage. The last truth. In the end, you'll realize the prison door was open all along. The guards were shadows, and the key was always in your hand. You just had to stop waiting for permission to use it. Now, go.